us at TEMA looking at this element as to how we approach from a perspective of TEMA, the physical environment to me means a whole lot. It's one of the things that all of us need to embrace, and we need to make the necessary changes in order for us to move forward effectively as it relates to the Comprehensive Economic Development Plan. And therefore, there is something that stood out very strongly in the whole preface of the document way back, the whole thing about redoubling our efforts. And I think this is where what we need to do is to read. And I really thank those who went before, making my job a little more simpler as we go through this presentation. So these are the key points that I'm going to be spending a little bit of time on. But more importantly, what I want to say is that from the TEMA perspective, where we are, there are a number of frameworks that influence what we do. And therefore, internationally, we normally will speak to the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is key. And therefore, regionally, we also will speak to the comprehensive economic, we will speak to things like the comprehensive management strategy in regards to disaster that is now propagated by CEDP. Nationally, we look to our national platform where there is a statement and a forum being created for a national disaster risk reduction. That framework pinned to what we are now looking at in the Comprehensive Economic Development Plan. All these are frameworks that influence how we conduct our business. At the end of the day, it requires a particular kind of definition that we may consider to be HD. It's the difference between looking at that screen from in the back and looking at the screens across here. It's something like what Dr. Bob will speak about in Habakkuk 2:2, making the vision as plain as possible. It's important for us to understand as we go forward that there's a buy-in that is necessary at all levels. And therefore, we must appreciate what we are doing. The physical environment, to me, speaks to something that I came across in Barbados. I didn't feel too well about it. There was a rating done in regards to 5 countries in the Caribbean. And Trinidad and Tobago did not come first, second, or third. It wasn't a test, but we were somewhere between 4th and 5th. The assessments speak directly to national public investment systems. And to me, this is what is needed as we seek to create avenues for risk reduction. All that we spoke about, that we are talking about today in this room, lends itself an important element to disaster risk reduction. When we speak about sustainable development, whatever we do in our physical space, when we look at the spatial layout, we have to carefully look and see whether or not we are just commentating on the movements of the development or whether we are engineering it. And to me, that is important. The suitability of our engineering in our physical infrastructure is key. How we do things. Are we understanding what is the effects of climate variabilities? Do we understand what is happening with climate change? Are we making the right approaches in making these changes? And I'm saying we need to look at our efforts again and redouble it. For example, our road networks. Is it mirroring what is happening with all that we see in terms of, for example, our road networks really road networks that complement the onset of rainfall, for example, drainage and things like that. These are elements that we must pay attention to. So proper drainage infrastructure is key. As we look at disaster management, one of the things that is clear is that our infrastructure, especially as it relates to our utilities, need to be looked at very clinically. With the onset of climate change, you recognize that there is more intensity in rainfall. And therefore, it requires a type of drainage, and I know Doc may speak about it later on, that needs to mirror the type of rainfall that we are having. And therefore, our utilities as well we depend on them so much. The power to make it work, the Water and Sewage Authority even depends on the power. For example, I've seen a new trend in the north side area, whereby when there is no electricity, there is no water. And therefore, it speaks to how well we are doing in terms of making that bridge between our infrastructure, our utilities, as we go forward. We need to step where we can find a balance that we consider that there is resiliency in our planning as we go along. So our public sector investment needs to step up to that challenge whereby we can make the necessary changes and make the necessary adaptation as we go along. So I made a point about a firmer and a more clinical understanding, and I said HG needs to be high definition, where we understand it clearly, and it needs to reach down to the lowest man in the street. The children even need to understand what is happening. And therefore our performance will be better. Our physical planning. A lot was said about the building codes. I would just want to reiterate it's important that we do the necessaries to bring these building codes into effect. We look at Port of Spain, for example, and I just want to use Port of Spain as an example. And look at what you call, I'm not sure if you ever heard about, you know about West Mooring. I'm not sure if you ever hear about East Mooring. But East Mooring is just what is the opposite, the beat-up. And therefore, when you look at it, the homes, so you have Port of Spain, every building in Port of Spain probably is built to a particular code. Am I right or wrong? To some level of code. But you have an unplanned building taking place just east of Port of Spain. What do you think will happen in a major hydrological event, such as a Category 3 hurricane? It means that East Mooring will become the missiles that will tear apart your infrastructure. And that speaks to our infrastructure and planning. So we can't have one group conforming to laws, and we have another group doing their own thing. We need to be able, and I went to Trinidad so that we have a perfect opportunity here in Tobago to get it right. And therefore, if we redouble our effort, I am quite certain that we will get there. Disaster preparedness, as I mentioned earlier on, we need to create plans in all our sectors. We need to start a conversation where we plan for what is going to happen. Eventually, it will hit the fan, and therefore, whatever hits the fan affects everybody. And therefore, we need to look at these plans and have them tested, exercise in a particular way that we could make sure that we are comfortable with our procedures. So we need to make sure that at every level people are aware of what to do, and therefore this slide that shows the children playing a very important role as we educate our young ones to become so mindful as we go forward. These are some of the hazards. Most of them are related to hydrometeorological events, and therefore it is quite clear that some of which can be considered to be natural, a number of them is the doings of man and how we do. So therefore, it makes a point about our infrastructure, the resilience that is needed. It's important, it's an imperative going forward. A lot was said about our environment and making sure that it is clean. And therefore, I want to reemphasize that an unclean environment lends to a number of diseases. Littering, deforestation, and how we manage the environment is critical going forward. And again, we want to make the point, we all that are in this room will play a very important part in carrying that message, that very important message, to whoever the stakeholders may be in making the necessary adaptation as we go along. Climate variability and climate change. I did make the point that the intensity of our rainfall is critical. It is very important for us to understand the characteristics of the hazards to which we share the planet with. We live on the surface of the earth, and it requires a particular behavior as we share the space. And therefore, planning for it is critical. We look at our recent rainfall. We are looking carefully at our spatial development. especially what is happening in the southwestern end of the island, what is taking place in Scarborough, even in these parts. What is shaping it? Is it being engineered? So these are the things that we need to take a look at. And not to mention what is happening regionally, the effects of sargassum seaweed in terms of what is happening in our space. Our very livelihood can be threatened by almost anything, and therefore we need to make the necessary changes. That's the point. And in closing, I just want to re-emphasize the importance of our national public investment system. It needs to take into consideration all that we spoke about. We spoke about these things earlier on today, so I'm not going to go there. What we would have done in the past is important. So we could talk about prevention, we could talk about mitigation, we could talk about preparedness, but at the end of the day, a house is going to burn. And therefore, response capability is quite critical. So it's important for us at TEMA, looking at these challenges, to have a very careful, what you may consider to be contingency planning going forward. And therefore, these are some of the initiatives that we took. Today, we can simply, humbly boast about our information management systems. I think we have a very strong system, or we can speak to things like the decentralization of community emergency kits, because we know things are going to happen. As I said, things hit the fan every now and again. And therefore, it's important that we have a particular type of response. We are the only country in the world that I know of that have a professional arm of CERT. There are about 2,000 CERT technicians or more in Trinidad. They are all volunteers. I know definitely that the country presently is looking at setting up 5 stations in Trinidad that are professionally. We have done well so far in that we, in Tobago, have been able to have 2 professional stations set up, and they serve our communities. That is good. The impact assessment and special needs survey was a critical exercise that we did, where we looked at our existing infrastructure as it relates to the residential properties, and also a special needs survey whereby we were able to geomap those persons that are especially affected in one way or the other. Our early warning system speaks for itself, and our community vulnerability risk management campaign we started in 2010. And last year, we started what you call the TEMA Virtual Vision. It's a new technology across the world where people are looking at crowdsourcing. In other words, everybody in here with a smartphone have the ability to become that reporter and be able to capture information and stay in the know by having. So I expect those of you that have smartphones in the room, it was announced that there is wireless connectivity here. Go to your smartphone and download TEMA Virtual Vision on the Google Play Store. It's for free. You never can tell when things will change when you have to pay for it. There's a businessman that wants to buy the software in order for him to sell it. So take advantage of the freeze. And these are the pictures of the initiatives that we spoke about. And I want to conclude by thanking the Comprehensive Economical Development Group for this initiative. And I trust that we need to continue to act in a particular way that will preserve our life here on the planet, and also add to the development that I consider that it must be sustainable as we go ahead. Thank you very much.